happened, and to sort of just ask you to first talk about that.
Wow. There's prior to the film, I think VC spent 10 years building community relations and doing our films, building trust within the community, doing some outreach. But I'd have to say the success of all of those people who volunteered to be part of the film, really, we owe it to Amy Kato, who is back there, and Nancy Rodney. We went out to those dozens of community groups to beg them to come on out and be part of the film. And again, I think it was based on the work that we had done for many years in Little Tokyo, that people were willing to come out and help. In fact, you saw that people were up all night long doing, Nisei Week 1935. Cultural groups, music groups, martial arts groups, they just spent all night long out in Little Tokyo. And another story, that was the only time that a motion picture company ever shut down East First Street, the historic East First Street in Little Tokyo. The studios had all gone to the merchants, and they said, no way we're going to shut down East First Street. But when Amy and Nancy went to each storefront and asked them if we could shoot this particular scene, we got the go-ahead, and you saw us. You say 1935.
So Amy's not just a nurse who takes care of everybody, it's also just a community organizer too. So, and continue the community, there's a creative community that's part of the film doing, and it's really an all-star cast of its time from Mako and everybody else, and the music as well. Can you talk about that a little bit deeper?
Well, I think we really need to talk about the actors because unfortunately, all of the lead actors have passed except for Sachiko, but this was really, it was very unique, and it was a time for both Mako and Pat Morita to finally get roles that they really felt good about. I should tell you about how we created the script and then went to Mako to ask him if he would be part of the film. John and Bob and others who worked on the dialogue, I think, wrote it with Mako in mind. And so when we showed Mako the script, and in fact, I still remember the meeting going to East West Players, and Bob Nakamura and I went to Mako, and he was sitting there, and we went up to him and go, Mako, you're the legend of East West Players, and would you be in our film, kind of thing. And he wrote these specific lines and scenes for you. And, in character, Mako is going, no. We're like stunned. And I didn't know what to do at that point. But then, we start coming around again by saying, oh, we wrote this specific scene, we've heard you say stuff like this, etc. And, in character, he goes, no, didn't you hear what I said? I said no. And so, and then he gets up and starts walking out the room, and we go, oh, well, the film is just like gone. It's out the window. And then he whirls around, throws the script in the air, everything flies around, and of course he goes into that laugh that you heard when he was out in that scene with all those doing the tankabushi, has that laugh and goes, you guys are so stupid, you believe this. And then we just sat down and started talking about the film. That was the beginning of Iko. I thought it was good.
Pat Morita is also in the film. Prior to that, too, he was known for Happy Days and sort of as a comic too. Right, this is right before Karate Kid. He also talked about his part of the film, but also what came out of that.
Once again, Pat Morita had already done Happy Days. He was a pretty big star. He was one of the only Asian Americans we'd ever seen on TV with a regular role. And when we first met him, it was kind of cool. We were all joking around and blah, blah, blah. But the story I was telling about Pat was first day we shoot with him, he comes up to me and goes, Dwayne, I have this little thing here, and could you just help me out? And he shows me this bag, and it's got a quart of Stolichnaya vodka in it. And so he goes, do you think we could just and I said, I got the guy just for you, and it's our production assistant, Stan Nakazono. And so Stan's job during that whole day was to stamp. Pat Morita told him to put this bottle in the freezer of the refrigerator at our office, so it's nice and cold. And in between takes, he would have Stan run over to the freezer, pour a little paper cup of vodka. Pat would just down it, and then he would just go out and kill the scene. So he was a pro.
And so part of the talk story too was the scenes at the rooftop was actually was submitted for him for his audition, right, for Karate Kid. And
Wow.
Yes, so I heard this from Nancy Araki, but I believe it to be true. But yes, so we shot this between his role in Karate Kid, but before, his role in Happy Days, but before Karate Kid. And we understand that he used that pigeon scene to audition for the Karate Kid. And after that, as you know, it was all history.
so part of the history of this was sort of the funding, from what I've heard learned, was the funding was initially to create documentary short films. And prior to this film, for the first 10 years of visual communications, it was really a lot of documentary films. And part of the talk story was you and Steve Tatsukawa, who was one of the Carnival Barkers, who you just remembered him for his 40th year of his passing, was both of you was talking about turning this into a narrative feature film. Can you talk a little bit more about that process?
Well, we kind of put one over on the Department of Education. We did get funded for a series of documentaries on the Japanese American experience, and we said, we're never going to have this much money together at one time. And you know that any film student going through film school, in the back of their minds, they're always thinking, when am I going to do that feature film? And so, Bob and I, Steve, we said, this is it. This is the only opportunity we'll have to do a longer film. So we just put all of that money together into one feature and said, well, there might be 6 parts in here until the Department of Ed, but this is what we have. So that's how that happened. And I'll add on to that by saying that I was just reminded more recently about kind of an incident in the finalization of Hitohata. We were running out of money at the end. We needed to shoot a couple more scenes. We had no money. I'm sitting in the office with Steve Tatsukawa, who is the executive producer, right? He gets the credit. So I'm asking him, Steve, we need more money to shoot the last couple scenes. And so we just rack our brains, and we're thinking of all of our friends. And the only people we knew that owned a home at that time was Alan and Yvonne Nishio. So they were the only adults in the group. So we had to go to Alan and ask him, could we take out a loan against your house? And Alan kind of was fidgeting, but he was part of the board of directors, so there was a lot of pressure on him. And so then we heard that he had to go home and ask Yvonne if they could put their house on the line for us. So, Hitohata got made. They still have a house. Unfortunately, we all attended Alan's memorial service a few months ago.
Thank you for that story. I want to ask you for yourself, Dwayne, does the film hold up for you?
It really does. I was so glad to see the film. I only saw it, I think, for the first time in San Jose. Of course, we played it quite a bit right after it was made, and we had to make back quite a bit of money, so we did showings all around the country. But then it kind of laid low for a long time. And this current edition of the VC leadership is so forward-thinking. They started really thinking about resurrecting these films, getting them transferred to a digital medium that would be color-corrected and audio-sweetened, so that we would have a presentation like this. This was shot in 16 millimeter film, little tiny images. And so it's really to the credit, I think, of the current staff and of your forward thinking that we have now kind of a revival of these films, and I've been able to go to at least a half a dozen more showings around the country to talk about this. But it really does hold up, I feel, in many ways. I talked to some of the VC staff today, and they've been, some of those scenes could have been shot yesterday in Little Tokyo, kind of thing. But I'm really glad to see that it really does hold up for me.
A lot of the themes still hold up because it's still happening in Little Tokyo. I'm fortunately or unfortunately is also the chair of the Little Tokyo Community Council because of these two folks here. Chris tricked me into doing that. But a lot of the themes are still the same, and we were talking sort of how it kind of holds up in that part, and it could be maybe 20 years later and kind of like the same thing that Issei would have went through, or even now with Sansei going through some of the things that's there. And sometimes I feel like I have to watch this almost every day to kind of get through some of the things that we're still going through, right? But there's sort of like a message here, sort of that spirit to just keep doing and being resilient as well too. So I always sort of look back at this film as sort of that core message and that holds up. I think will hold up for another 20 and other future generations too. So before I opened up sort of any conversations,
can I just make, I have a few acknowledgements to make as well. I want to start with the land and culture acknowledgement. I don't have the official wording, but certainly one thing I was just so proud of VC taking on our cohort, Pacifica and Poly filmmakers. And I came to the Armed with the Camera showing last night and was just so impressed and inspired by local and other Pacifica filmmakers. And again, I'm just so proud of VC giving them voice because they certainly have an identity and a story to tell. But moving on, I want to also acknowledge Honolulu Museum of Art and Sarah for hosting us and presenting us with a great facility. I want to acknowledge the current VC staff who set all of this up. Francis here, Jason, who you might have met earlier, Kirby, Ilcia, and I think Emily and others that I met just today. So thank you very much. Some of you coming all the way from LA to help us present this showing. I want to acknowledge, of course, my co-director, the legendary Robert A. Nakamura, the godfather of Asian American film. Of course, Bob, pretty much directed most of the scenes, and we did a lot of collaboration on this film. But also my colleagues in starting visual communications, Eddie Wong, Alan Ohashi, and Alan Kondo to that mix. That's the early crew that started all of these films. We have some really special guests here tonight. One is John Asaki, who is the writer of the film. And I did mention already his wife, the nurse, who got the biggest reaction in the film, apparently. But Amy Kato, who played many different roles in the film, but again, I think really helped to create the look by bringing in so many extras in those huge crowd scenes. Let me also point out that here tonight is Doug Aihara, who any group of visual communications needs a board of directors that will stand behind and support this group and try to find its money. And Doug Aihara has been part of VC's board of directors for over 50 years. So that's it. A really special guest that's here tonight is Dr. Jocelyn Luckett, who is one of the few Asian American film scholars, among other topics that she oversees. She's probably single-handedly responsible for creating or resurrecting the LA Rebellion filmmaker colleagues that we went to school with at UCLA, but also someone who has written extensively about Asian American film. And so we really need the scholarly and intellectual background along with the community support. Thank you. I want to just acknowledge my wife, artist Lucy Nkubo. We got married in 1979, and then I started working on this film, and for 2 years I didn't really see her, so that's what happened. And then finally, I want to thank all of you LA friends that came out, our Hawaii friends, and the friends from the progressive community here. So thank you very much.
Thank you again, Doug. Not sure if I told you, Chris, but he mortgaged his house like 10 times to support us. We're going to open up sort of comments and questions from the, especially if you watched this prior to, this is your 40 years later, you watched it again. Any questions or comments or things that I want to say? I'll bring you the mic.
Hi, thank you so much for bringing this screening here. It was truly serendipity that we got to watch it. We bumped into our friend, we're from Boston. We bumped into our friend Susan Chinson here, literally in the airport in Boston. And we're both going to Honolulu for 2 different conferences. And she told us about Hitohata. And both my husband and I, Fred, we had seen Hitohata when it was opening totally separately. I was in college, and I helped organize a screening of Hitohata in New England.
Oh, great.
And,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, but it's kind of amazing. I hadn't heard anything about it for 40 years, or very little. And I think the film is still beautiful and true, and it should be, screened. It should be disseminated.
Thank you. I will say that many young people come up to me and say, we had never had contact with the Issei generation. Sanseis, we were the last group to really know our grandparents. And so now many young people come to me and say, wow, we didn't know this and this happened with the Issei generation. We're so glad you did this film. So yeah, thank you very much.
Nurse Amy.
Nurse Amy here. Thank you, Dwayne, for all the wonderful acknowledgement, but it was a very great experience for me. I was only 24, my first production. I don't know what I was doing, but because of Nancy and being able to speak Japanese, we were able to go around and speak to all these various groups, and they're very excited about getting involved with the production. But my question to you, Dwayne, is could you talk about the locations that you shot at? And especially I'm interested with the vigilante scene that you did.
Okay. So there was that fight scene, and the farm workers get kind of attacked by a white vigilante group. And then all of a sudden there's a fire and this cabin's burning down. My production manager, John Rear, I had him go out in Fresno County to all these farms within, 30 or 40 miles and ask people, do you have a building that we could burn down? And you know what? John found one, Fresno County, kind of 30 miles away, and so we went out there and we shot that scene. We shot the fight and all of that kind of stuff, and they're driving away, and then finally we did the scene and just burned that farmhouse down. So that's kind of the serendipity. That's the kind of thing that happens when you're working on a film over 2 years. Just things happen, and they get incorporated into the film. If we find out that someone has a talent like the young woman who was the ballet dancer, we find out that she's taking ballet lessons, and we say, wow, can you just do this for the camera? She was great. So that's how you work with the cast and people that you have and with the community.
So was that just a one-take shot?
That's a one-take shot, that's right. And I will also say that similar to that scene, the scene with the guy getting run over by the railroad locomotive, etc., that was shot in Laws, California. And I don't know, when you see those guys dancing around doing takobushi, you see the what do you call it, when it's really freezing and you can see their breath. Well, everyone was just puffing away because it was freezing that night. It was like 30 degrees, below freezing. And we're out there, trying. And then so we give them all shots of sake, and they start dancing. So that's how they felt really great in a 32-degree night. Any other questions, Amy?
Any other questions or comments?
How about the music?
Yeah, I mean, along with really crediting the actors for making this film, I mean, let's give it up for Dan and June Kuramoto. We have worked with Dan quite a bit with our documentary films. I think they had done like half a dozen of our films, and we knew that Dan would do this film for sure. But just given how we work and kind of how the deadlines are, we only gave him 2 weeks to create the score for a 96-minute film, and it was great. I mean, the theme was behind it. The shakuhachi, he plays flute, so the shakuhachi that Mako practiced for weeks. I mean, he's not a shakuhachi player, but he needed to kind of fake it. And so, everyone's really, I think, trying their best in this film.
Any comments or questions?
I also, I don't know, I saw Amy Hill here earlier. Is she still here?
She left.
Oh, okay. She would have some great stories about East-West players in Mako in the group.
So, Dwayne, I see the film as sort of a love letter to the older generation, the future generation. Sort of my final question to you is, what's the takeaway that you want people when they see this film, not just now, but in the future?
Well, I would hope that in the end, the audiences would see that, like the people in the film, we Japanese Americans came here to do a job, and we faced quite a bit of many challenges, but working together in community, and I've really learned that here in Hawaii, working together in community, we can do great things. And so I never thought that we could do a film of this scale, but we needed to kind of create that sense of community that we could do this. And so that's how I think Hito Hata came around. So I would hope that the takeaway would be that we need to work together to create these kinds of images and products.
Well, thank you, Dwayne.
Thank you all.
Thank you all for being here.